So let's move on to the fourth presentation of today. Our speaker for this session is Derek Kwik, Managing Partner of Brave Soldier Ventures. The presentation topic is transforming your wearable from a startup to a real business. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Derek. I'm going to be talking about transforming your business from a startup to a real business. Just a little bit about myself. My background is in it's been in tech for a long time, since the late 90s. I've been working exclusively with startups since then, in different capacities, but mostly in venture capital, investing in companies. And since '99, I've read over 15,000 business plans. It sounds like it's a big number, but if you read 20 business plans every week for 15 years, you'll get there. I also have a lot of China manufacturing experience. All those different products on there I've worked on, mostly in Shenzhen, but also in Zhuhai and Guangzhou and Dongguan. And everything from electronic cigarettes to wearables, headphones, MP3 players, mobile phones, PC peripherals, and robotics. And we're not just investors, we're also operating partners. And that's very interesting because in my talk today, I'm going to give two different perspectives. One is as an investor, and the other one as an operating partner, where we actually work with the company to help them with manufacturing. This especially helps with companies that are based in the US, and they need a partner on the ground here that can help them monitor the factory, help them monitor production, and actually be there on a weekly basis, if not on a daily basis. And there's a difference between being a startup and transforming yourself into a real business. And I'll get into that in just a minute, but it's very, very different in terms of the dynamics, the type of focus and the emphasis that you put into being a startup versus being a real business. In a real business, you really have a lot of procedures and processes that are in place. They're practiced, they're tried and true, and you know they work. In startups, you're still scrambling around trying to figure out how to institutionalize that process, how to build your SOPs. So there's a lot of trial and error in doing that. So my advice is get out of startup mode as soon as possible. What that means is there's an issue where you can spend a lot of time crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is great, but crowdfunding, even if it's a successful program, it's a false positive because those aren't your real customers. So you could raise some money doing crowdfunding, but just keep in mind that they're not your real customers. They're people who support the startup community, but they're not necessarily your customers. If you want to understand who your customers are, you have to build a focus group. You have to understand who your customers are and build that focus group and get your feedback from them. But building a crowdfunding campaign and getting funding from there, those aren't going to be your customers. So you have to be very, very realistic about that. If you want to do these things like join an accelerator, that's great. Just do it one time and then really get to work. Because most accelerators, they tell you the same thing, so you only need to go one of them to learn it. But you don't need to go from one to the next because you spend a lot of time getting that same education, but not commercializing your business. Same thing with pitch events. If you go do a pitch event, if you want that experience of learning how to pitch to investors, just go to one. You don't need to go to be a professional pitcher and just go from one to the next because when you put that in your business plan of having pitched at these events or won some of these events, it doesn't really move the needle on the decision-making process for an investor to say that you won this pitch event and you won the next one and the next one. What is realistic is, are you selling your product? Are you talking to customers? Do you talk to distributors? That's where the value is. It's not about winning these pitching events. Having a government funding, that's great too, but the funding they give you isn't going to be a lot to get you to the next level of the next milestones that you want to achieve in your company. So it's something that's great to have the government support you, but it's not going to be that big chunk of money that you get from, let's say, an investor who would put in a lot more money than it would be to get either crowdfunding or get funding from the government. And of course, you know, the networking parties are great, but make sure you're speaking to the right people. You want to be speaking to investors. You want to be speaking to potential customers, maybe factories if you're at these types of events. But you don't want to spend too much time kind of circling around in here when you need to be out there bringing in sales and generating revenue for the company. So you have to think earlier. You have to be much more strategic in what you do. So there's actually a difference between being tactical and being strategic. Tactical is you're just kind of responding to things as they come at you. And it's very tiring to do that because you don't really get a chance to sit back and look at the big picture. If you're being strategic, you can actually do that. So there's a difference between the two. And you have to always ask yourself are you trying to solve a real world problem with, let's say, your wearable, or are you just enhancing the performance? So here's an example. This is a company called Kwik where they make this headset. So it's like your standard music player, but this is actually a personal coach that links personal training programs from all around the world. So if you think about having the sensory components like your activity, motion sensors, your tracking sensors, let's say in a Fitbit, where you're putting those into your headphones, so it's tracking all of your movements. And then you add in the component of creating this platform for all the personal trainers around the world where they don't have a scalable model because personal trainers, it's usually one-to-one, or maybe it's a bunch of people in a classroom and you're teaching yoga. But now you can actually create an audio file and train people that are halfway around the world just through these audio files that you can download and put onto this headset. And that's really interesting because you're able to reach out to the masses, and it's a real world issue with personal trainers who can't have that type of scale. Here's another one is Smart Fabrics. Like, this is another Hong Kong company. They create smart clothing, and from that you're able to determine different things based on body temperature. Today's wearable market, there's different business models. For the most part, it's either vertical or it's horizontal, and we'll get into that. But here, it's still very early days for wearables. It's only been around for a few years, and because of that, there's still a lot of pain points. Of course, charging is one thing because the batteries are really small, and battery technology has gotten to a point where we can actually have these things without having to charge it for a long period of time. They have to always be on in order to collect data, in order for that data to be meaningful. And a lot of times you have to literally wear the device in whatever activity you're doing. But when you're wearing it, there's a special way you have to wear it where it's always touching your skin. It can't be loose. So if you have a Fitbit sensor, it has to be tight on your wrist, otherwise it cannot record data. So these are some of the pain points that are making it hard for that adoption to take place. The other problem too is that it's competing with non-wearables. So you have other devices out there that can do the same thing, and they don't have to be worn on your body all the time. Imagine having a wrist-worn device that you have to either wear with you to sleep in order for it to track your sleep patterns, or during the day you have to make sure every morning you put it on in order for you to track your daytime movements. So that type of thing where you always have to be constantly be reminded to wear it is also a pain point. And I think it's for this reason that the adoption rate isn't as high as it should be. It can get better, but in order for these things to get better, the technology has to get better. And we're still waiting for wearables to get smarter. So now we're talking about ingestible, something that you would actually take orally, but then if it's oral, then you have to deal with government regulation like FDA, and that takes some time for approval. Sensors are getting smarter, and because of that, you're going to get more applications and more data that you can collect from it. and it needs to apply to a wider platform of devices. So when we talk about IoT, this really kind of hits the point here, is that it needs to be able to, your wearable has to be able to communicate across other types of platforms, whether it's AR or VR, even some gaming consoles. Your wearable has to be able to connect to those in order to capture more data. So business models, vertical or horizontal. I think a lot of these devices started off as being vertical, whereby it was basically a one use case, like let's say activity tracking, and then you had many devices that could do that. What's interesting is that that one device that is working to replacing a lot of these wearables is the mobile phone, and that's because it's driven by apps. So a horizontal business model would beat vertical just because of all the apps that you can put on your smartphone. And you can see here, all these devices now are pretty much obsolete. The number of devices here that are sold today than they were before smartphones became very popular. The smartphone pretty much replaced all of these things. So that type of one device that can do many things is a much more powerful business model. So if you look at Fitbit when it first came out, all it did was track your activity and it tracked your sleep. Today, if you look at Fitbit, it's actually evolved its business model to allow for downloading of apps. It works with other apps now so that it can collect more data, and it's a more robust model. For them as a public company, they need to be more interesting in order to generate more interest from investors and to be a more innovative company. And from that, you're able to get other types of data that you wouldn't be able to get, that you would normally be able to get from just your wrist-worn device. So it's much more powerful if you can do things like logging your dietary intake, or maybe creating, if you're a company, you create a wellness program for your employees, or if you work with a retailer, you can create this gamification where there are points that you can generate from that, and of course from there you can do sharing through social media, et cetera, et cetera. So it's thinking beyond the hardware of the device that you have. It's how are you going to integrate it into other types of platforms. This is very reminiscent of Pokemon Go and what you can do with augmented reality. It's examples like this that make your device that much more powerful. And you know, we talk about all the different types of wearables that are on the market, and everything kind of points towards China in terms of the manufacturing capabilities. So I've had over 500 day trips into Shenzhen. I just came back from Shenzhen yesterday, and I'm going to go back later this week. And it's really interesting to see how China has become, especially I think Shenzhen has become sort of the tech manufacturing capital for China. Everywhere across China, it's so spread out from Shenzhen all the way to Dongguan, and all the different types of products that can be made there. And it was once a sleepy fishing village like 30 years ago, and today it's one of the most advanced places to get something made. And you really have to give credit to companies like Apple, DJI, and Foxconn for institutionalizing the process and bringing up the quality standards of Chinese manufacturing. So made in Shenzhen does not mean the same thing as made in China. But you also have to give credit to big retailers like Walmart, who come to China and they visit the factories and they make sure that the factory has all of those processes in place. They are very, very particular about how products are manufactured. Everything from batch coding, where all the wearables out there, they all contain a battery and some sort of a PCB board, but you're going to have to batch trace all of these things because traceability to a big US retailer is very important. So if there's a product recall, they're able to pinpoint exactly which products, which production line was that manufactured, and they can pull those products off the line. If you don't have correct batch coding, what happens is the retailer will just ship everything back to you, and that's your problem. And that kind of of a financial impact on your company is going to be massive. Then it comes down to a finger pointing, then you blame the factory. There's just a lot of issues that come up. So that type of process that retailers put in place, it's not only to help them, but it's also to help you as well. Going from OEM to ODM, you choose what you want. China has so many different types. You can have a company that just makes, in this example, laser pointers, and you can slap your own brand name on there and sell it for however much you want. And that's one way. And the other way is you can go to a company that specializes in making handsets, like with the iPhone. IP protection, a lot of companies are so focused on the paperwork, but I think that's only 50% of the equation. The other part of the equation, which is actually more important, is enforcement. So it doesn't matter if you hold this piece of paper in the other saying that you own the IP. If you can't get it enforced, it doesn't matter. I think it's more powerful to, yes, you need to have that piece of paper, but it's also important to actually build the relationship with the factory. So it's about meeting with the factory, getting to know them, understanding the owner of the factory, seeing what other brands that they represent, other brands that they manufacture for, and talking to them and doing your due diligence and understanding what is the quality of the factory, how innovative are they, and doing building your relationships with them in that way. That's a much more powerful way because now you're creating so many touch points with the factory manager, the owners of the factory, the staff. It makes it, it's all based on trust. So we've been doing this for a while now where we work with this one company that makes electronic cigarettes. And 90% of the world's e-cigs are manufactured in Shenzhen. And the IP that we have is one thing, but just the trust that we have with the people in the factory. We're there almost every day. We work with them side by side. We have the door codes to access to their factory. We can walk through the halls on our own. We can walk into the engineers' rooms and work with them on the design. There's pretty much no place in this factory that has like 2,000 employees where we're not allowed to just walk into. And that type of trust between us and the factory has in us to let us do that, I think is significant. So having that piece of paper, it's great, but I'd rather have this type of relationship where we can actually be on a much more personal level with them, and that's much more powerful. How does a small team cover a global market? It's all by strategic partnerships. So if you're making a wearable, when you have your product, now you're out talking to customers, right? So it's B to B to B to B, and you're dealing with this e-commerce company, this distributor, this wholesaler, this retailer, the small one, and this big retailer, and you're having a whole team of people dealing with all these different customers in different quantities and different volumes and different prices, so your margins are different. It's much better if you can start, if you think big, think really big, think B to big B, or B to giant B, where you just have one customer that can just buy all this product from you and rain product down on all these smaller customers, and that's a much better way to scale your business. Because as a hardware product, you're only as successful as the number of distribution points. So if the more distribution points you have, the higher chance of success that you have. So here's an example when I talk about having just having one big distributor that can meet all of your needs is with this electronic cigarette company. It's not a wearable, but I think the example is the same. Is we partnered with the distribution point for this electronic cigarette is in convenience stores, and across the U.S. there's 180,000 convenience stores. So that's all the pharmacy chains, the gas station chains, the 7-Elevens, the Circle Ks, the Walmarts, and the mini marts, and so on and so forth. And we partnered with the largest distributor of tobacco products into convenience stores. So out of 180,000, their footprint is 160,000. And for us to partner with them, is that means that we don't have to go call up 7-Eleven and sell our product to 7-Eleven. We sell to the guy that sells to 7-Eleven. And they sell to Circle K and to Walmart and so on and so forth. So that type of strategic partnership where we only have one customer in the US, we sell to them, and they buy all this product from us, and they rain it down all across the US to all the different distribution channels within their footprint. That's massive, right? And it basically allows a small company, this company only has like 7 people in the company, to have this force multiplier of being able to distribute all this product across the entire country. And in this press release that we had out, we had over 76 million views on Yahoo, and even if that's a number that is too big to fathom, even if you cut that number in half to 30-something million, 38 million, that's still a massive number. So the opportunity here is fantastic. So 160,000 convenience stores is the opportunity. And since January of this year, so we've been on the market for 3 months now, we're only in 7,400 stores. But that's only for 90 days worth of distribution. And it's just going to keep growing at about 1,000 stores. I think it's 1,000 stores every week. So we're going to get there soon. And then, of course, the other type of distribution channel you can have is actually to build an e-commerce platform, right? So you build the e-commerce platform so that you're able to sell your product to customers. And this is great, too, because your margins are a lot higher here, right? You're not dealing with a middleman. And now we've just put out an infomercial on TV. So this infomercial runs every day, at night, at day, and it's just running on cable TV channel. And it's educating consumers about the product. It's a 30-minute infomercial because electronic cigarettes is a very new type of technology. It's only been around since 2008. And in technology terms, that's very young. So this infomercial allows customers to either go in store, as seen on TV, and buy it, or they go online and they buy it on the e-commerce platform, or they call the phone number on the commercial and they talk to an operator, and the operator will process that order for them. And it's great because every time we get a sale, my iPhone will keep pinging. And I'll just get a message on my iPhone that basically will tell me who bought what at what time of the day, and that's really nice validation to see that. And we have validation on social media with key opinion leaders that do unboxing videos. And this guy here, he has 268,000 YouTube followers. So when he does a product review about your company or your product, you can be sure that it actually caters to a wide audience. And it's also a double-edged sword where when you're ready to do social media, you have to be very careful that it's a double-edged sword, because if your product's great, that's fantastic. A lot of people will hear about it. But if your product doesn't perform as it's supposed to, everybody will hear about that as well. But we've been very fortunate. We've had like 18, 19 videos done now, and all of them have been fantastic. People are like, wow, this is great. Why didn't someone come up with this before? So it's been very, very positive. This is a vanity metric, but this is in Times Square in New York. And just to see the product there being advertised, I think is quite nice. It doesn't equate to sales. That comes later. But just to see that it's actually gotten that type of media coverage is nice to see. And every Friday is ship day. So I go to Shenzhen and I just see pallets of product being lined up and trucks coming by to pick it up every Friday. And that's always nice to see that the validation points, whether it's because you're walking down a factory line and you're seeing the product being made, to key opinion leaders in social media talking about your product, to signing a deal with a major distributor, to actually physically seeing the product at the factory getting ready to be shipped out. All of those touch points really point to the company once being a small startup, is now at a stage where it could actually be a global company. And of course, you have to physically be there. You cannot be a company, let's say in doing wearables, and not be physically present at the factory. You cannot do stuff by email. You can't do stuff by video conference. You can't call. It's always better to do things face to face. So, a good example of this is a company that we worked with before. They make an electronic sport watch. And because the volumes of this electronic sports watch was not very big, when we came to the factory is very big, very famous factory, but they made all of the sport watches for Nike. And whenever Nike came to the office, they would say, we don't want anybody else to be in the office, just us. So the factory would be closed, and we wouldn't be allowed to go there. We would have to go either before Nike came, or we'd go after Nike came, but we weren't allowed to be there when they were there. And if you're a small order, you're not going to get their A team, their best account manager. You're going to get their B team or their C team. That also influences the impact of how much leverage you have at the factory in terms of prioritizing the things that you need done. You need to be having the biggest factory work with you isn't necessarily the best thing unless you have an order that could match that. Otherwise, you're at the back of the line, and it might actually be better for you to work with a smaller factory. But being there is so important, because when you're there, you can actually see things. When you're in a conference room and you're speaking to the engineer, you ask them a question, they have to answer you immediately. And if they don't have the answer, you can say, well, go get the answer, and I'll wait for you here till you find out what the answer is. Whereas if you're doing it by phone or by email, you send them an email and then you have to wait. Sometimes they don't reply. Maybe they reply back, and the written English is not that great. It creates sort of a lot more questions. And if you're living in the U.S. and you're trying to do things in China, then you have time zone issues to deal with. So it's always better to be there in person, and you sit in the conference room and you do not leave until you get your answers. So I think it's important to remember these points. Is if you're going from being a startup to a real business, you have to think big. I mean, think really big. Think about having the biggest distributor you can imagine. Don't get all of these smaller distributors. Try to get a really big one. Think different. You have to be different in order to be remembered. And it's okay to have just a decent product that can have the potential to be great, because as you move along in the production process, as you roll down your product roadmap, your product will get better and better. And you want to focus on building a business. Don't focus on being a startup. And the reason why I have a picture of wonton noodles here is because everybody in the room, you can define yourselves as an entrepreneur or as a founder, but the guy across the street selling wonton noodles, the place that you go to lunch at, that guy is a founder and entrepreneur too. The difference between the two is that guy is a hustler. He knows every day it's all business. He needs to sell 50 bowls of wonton noodles for lunch, and he needs to sell 50 bowls of noodles for dinner, and that's how he pays his rent. It's all about business. So hustle is the most important word ever. When you're doing your startup, that's what you have to be doing every single day, is you really have to hustle. That's my talk for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek, for such a great sharing. Are there any questions on the floor? No? Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause.